slips here if they came from our high tunnels. Some of them came from Clarksville, and those were trees outside our tunnels there. They were just trees in our test plots. How did we get them so big? We did a couple of very interesting things this year. Some of our research objectives this year were in the tunnels at SwimRec. We started covering the tunnels very early. We wanted to see if we could advance bloom and yet still protect from frost, because the earlier you advance bloom, of course, the greater you increase the risk of spring frosts, and the more severe those spring frosts may be. The lower the temperature is going to be that you may experience, the more you push bloom from late April back towards late March. So we covered our first tunnel, tunnel number 4, on, I think it was March 14th. It was during the second week of March. So you'll see these rainiers here and these skenas here, tunnel number 4, that was the first one that was covered, second week of March. Tunnel number 3 was covered about 8 days later, 22nd or so. Tunnel number 2 was covered about 8 days later, maybe about March 30th. And tunnel number 1 was covered about April 8th, I believe it was. And then the 5th sample that doesn't say tunnel underneath were the cherries grown outside the tunnel. So we have a real nice comparison of field grown, covered close to bloom, covered earlier, and earlier yet. And it's the same deal with the skenas over here. So that's one reason I was really pleased that we had no significant frost damage, because I was prepared to worry about putting propane heaters in the tunnels, getting up in the middle of the night, and making sure that we had no frost damage. Being 2 hours away from the tunnels, being on main campus, that causes you a lot of sleepless nights. And you really have to pull strings with friends and farm managers to try to even talk about the possibility of doing that. So this year we really dodged a lot of bullets. We had no frost of that kind to worry about. We did stagger the bloom out. Tunnel number 4 and 3 bloomed pretty close together, but they bloomed at least a week, maybe even 10 days before the rest. Tunnel number 2 bloomed a little bit later than that, and tunnel number 1 bloomed pretty much at the same time as the trees outside. You may recall we had perfect pollination weather too. Things warmed up nicely when cherries came out down in that area at least, and everything bloomed kind of all at once for the most part. So one of the really interesting things here is with tunnel number 1 and the cherries outside the tunnel blooming at the same time, you can still see a very distinct difference in stage of ripening. The cherries on this side were picked on June 30th. The cherries on this side were picked on June 22nd. So there's an 8-day difference in picking time, but these are the same trees. These skenas were all picked on June 30th, and you can see, most particularly in the skenas, you know, a lot of bright red here. The fruit are much smaller, they're still quite firm. These clearly aren't ripe, because skena is a late ripening variety. So this variety outside the tunnels at SwimRec are probably ripe right about now. So it's July 9th. So these that were picked 10 days ago, you can see they were ripe 10 days ago compared to the ones that probably are ripe now. You can go through and taste these, see if you taste the difference. The data that we worked up pretty much showed a distinct pattern the way we had bloom. Let's talk about these cherries here from the 30th, the Rainiers. The no tunnel cherries, the sugar level in those is 18 degrees Brix. In these cherries from tunnel number 1 bloomed at the same time, about the same, actually slightly smaller, lower Brix, 17.5. Tunnel number 2, we're up at 18.7. Tunnel number 3, 19.8. Tunnel number 4, 20.5. So you can see more and more sugar in those cherries that bloomed earlier. So we've spread out the ripening stage as well as the bloom stage, which is what we were hoping to see. We're still working through the pertinent research, which is to calculate growing degree days, to figure out how many growing degree days did we pick up by covering the first tunnel and then 8 days later covering the next one. What was the growing degree day difference between those two, and how does that translate towards ripeness? Because one thing we hadn't really thought through was that, well, if we cover a week apart, will we bloom a week apart and ripen a week apart? Turns out it's really hard to accumulate a lot of growing degree days when temperature's only 40 degrees outside the tunnel anyway back in March. maybe that's a warm day. Maybe you have some days that are down around 30 and 28. So the big differences of my calendar of the early covering didn't translate to big differences on the tail end, because it's a growing degree day accumulation issue as opposed to a calendar issue. So that's something we'll be working through and probably reporting at the Great Lakes Expo in December as we analyze all this. And we'll do that for the Rainiers and the Skenas. But take a look at those, taste them, see what those differences are, because I think that's very exciting. We've talked before, and I can talk more about the various advantages and the challenges of growing cherries in tunnels. But if you can grow the same variety and have it ripen over a 2-week period, from your first cover tunnel to your last cover tunnel or your outside trees, maybe even extend that more, that's a real cool marketing advantage. You don't have to switch to other varieties, and so we think that could be a nice management tool for growers. What else? All the cherries down here at this end are breeding selections from the Washington State program. That's why they just have code names. There was a notice that came out last week in a rival magazine of Matt's, little email notice, I think it was, that said WSU is releasing 2 of these cherries that are resistant to powdery mildew. So if you want to know which ones those are, it's WSU number 3 and WSU number 5 over here. The others, there's some that I think look better than those, and we're going to be watching them real closely to see if we might be able to convince WSU to release 1 or 2 more that look really good, at least for us, under tunnels. And all of these, as I said, were grown under tunnels, but you can see some of these varieties pretty consistently produced 8-row cherries, cherries that were 14 grams, 13 grams. We even had some cherries that were 20 grams, and that's just a massive cherry. 30 millimeters in diameter, 1 1/4 inches, 1 1/3 inches. To see a tree that's got all of those kinds of big cherries in it, just, you can't stop smiling. It's just amazing.